Then we'll talk about the interest rates. What do you mean by interest rates and what it means to different people? And once we know these two important aspects, then we can very well get into computations. Time value of money are related computations where we talk about determination of future values. We'll talk about determination of present values of different kinds of cash flows, and we'll also talk something about annuities. So how all these things can be calculated using our time value of money related concepts. So just let's get started with that as a broad starting point. See, most of the times what happens is we enter into the processes of either saving money or borrowing. And whenever we do that, when I borrow it, let's say I borrow today, but I repay at a later date. And in the process, I'm paying something higher than what I have typically borrowed. Same way, when I'm trying to save something, I'm saving some X today. But when I'm taking this X probably at a later date, I'm getting something more than what I'm typically saving. What does that mean? The value of money differs with time. And every one of us know that whatever the X which we are receiving today is much more than the X that we receive, the same X we receive in future. And the other way of looking at it is the X of today should be equivalent to X plus Y in future. So whatever we are receiving at a future date, a larger amount is equal to a slightly smaller amount as of today, right? So that is what we are trying to find, the equivalence between the cash flows at a future date versus a present date. What is that makes these two cash flows same? What is that probably if I am getting $1,000 after 2 years, what is the equivalent of it today? Is it $900? Is it $920? Or is it $990? Now that is what is being discussed as a part of the understanding of the time value of money. And typically whenever we are dealing in the world of finance, the time value of money becomes one of the most important topics, because the one key thing that we can master once we know the time value of money is the relationship between the different cash flows which are going to come up at different dates. Because in most of the cases, every investment, every borrowing, we deal with different cash flows at different dates. Now, how do I link all of them, and how do I express the equivalence relationship between all of them to assess my overall profitability of the investment or overall cost of the loan? So if I am talking of investment, overall profitability of the investment can very well be assessed using the same concept of time value of money. If I am trying to get into the borrowing process, what is the cost of borrowing? Even that is coming out through this time value of money related concept itself. right? So with that as a base, let's get started into the understanding of time value of money. So the key driver in this entire time value of money is the interest rate. Right, all the calculations, when I say that I have deposited 900 today and I am getting 1000 after 2 years, whatever the additional that I have got is purely because of the interest. Money carries interest with the time. As the time passes, money carries interest. And so the interest rate, in some cases, it could be a known quantity. It is decided at the beginning itself. Probably when I am doing a fixed deposit, the interest which I would be getting on my deposit, I would be knowing in advance. But in some cases, it is a completely unknown quantity, or probably it is more of a volatile kind of a quantity as well. So, first of all, the understanding of the interest rates is important, because that is what we would be using in majority of our time value of money computations. So, when I am saying interest rate, we define it from 3 different dimensions. One, I define the interest rate as the required rate of return. The first definition of the interest rate, I look at it as the required rate of return. So what is that minimum return the investor will expect if he really wants to invest in a particular investment mechanism? What is that minimum rate of return that would be expected by the investor if he wants to invest in a particular investment mechanism? And the second way I look at it is the discount rate. When I use the word discount rate, if I am going to get some X in future, by what rate I should discount it? What should be the cut? What should be the cut that I can really accept? And what is the value, what could be the value of it after discounting this X as of today? Probably X minus some P. So we can very well look at the discount rate, whatever is the cut in the value based on the passage of the time. So interest rates can be looked at from the perspective of discount rate, and sometimes what people in the finance world, we try to use these two words more or less interchangeably. And the third dimension I look at interest rate is the opportunity cost. Sometimes you look at it, I'm saving, let's say $1,000 I have deposited in a bank, versus I have spent today. If I am spending 1000 today, I have lost an opportunity of probably getting 1050 after 1 year. Let's assume if I have spent 1000 today, I have lost an opportunity to deposit that 1000 and get 1050 after 1 year, which means the opportunity cost here is 5%. I have lost the opportunity of increasing my money by 5%, and that is what we are calling as the interest rate. So interest rate could be defined in terms of opportunity cost, whatever is the value that the investor is going to forego because of the action that has been taken. And the next thing is, once I know the definition of the interest rates, we always observe that the interest rates typically change on a regular basis because of the demand and supply being created. Now, who are the suppliers? Suppliers typically are the investors who keep supplying the funds, and the borrowers are the people who keep borrowing the funds. And the typical interest rate, which is driven by the market forces of supply and demand, what we generally see is the composition. The composition of the interest rate goes like a real risk-free rate plus different kinds of premiums being added on the top of it. One being an inflation premium. One, I have a premium for inflation, the typical way the interest rate gets designed. One is an inflation premium. Then I talk about the default risk premium, the premium that comes because of scope of default. Then we bring in a liquidity premium and a maturity premium. So this is how the typical interest rate comes out. Just trying to understand what each of them is. When I say a real risk-free rate, real is a word always comes into picture when inflation is not considered. When inflation is considered, we use the word as nominal. But when inflation is not considered, we are using the word real risk-free rate. And as word is saying, it's a completely the interest rate on a risk-free kind of a security, which in a real world is always difficult to see. Inflation-free world, whatever is the risk-free rate of interest, that is what we are calling as real risk-free rate. But the major things are, now when I am bringing in the inflation premium, whatever is the average inflation that is going to occur during or over the maturity of the debt. So if the debt is a 3-month debt or a 6-month debt or a 5-year loan, whatever it is, during the maturity of that, whatever is the average inflation that we are going to expect during that particular period, that is what is being added to the real risk-free rate, and only this much alone is called as the nominal risk-free rate. No other risks being added, no other premiums being added. We call that as a nominal risk-free rate. Generally, we see that the government debts, probably a government debt of, let's say, 90-day treasury bills, whatever is the interest rate that is associated with this short period, because the moment I go for a longer period, maturity premium is going to come into picture. So when I am looking at a shorter period government debt, whatever is the interest rate that is available on that, we can equate it to a nominal risk-free rate. And then we are talking about a default risk premium, where non-government, probably the corporate borrowing or individual borrowing, where there is some kind of possibility of failing to pay. Some kind of a possibility of failing to pay or delaying to pay. So whether it is in terms of time or in terms of amount, any kind of failure to pay is associated with a probability of default. So because of that an additional risk is getting created, and because of that an additional premium is getting added to compensate the investor with that kind of a possibility of a default risk. Then the third dimension that I am bringing in is the liquidity premium. See, suppose I'm holding one investment, but I want to sell it off. I want to sell it off immediately because I have some need for money. What typically happens is I may be forced to sell it at a lesser value. I may not be able to sell it at an appropriate